Welcome back. You're watching a midweek edition of Business Morning on Channels Television. On the program today, we're going to be talking about the MPC, that's the Monetary Policy Committee's pronouncement on key monetary rates, and I'm being joined on the program by two economic analysts. Mr. Bismarck Riwani is the Managing Director, Chief Executive Officer of Financial Derivatives Company Limited, and Mr. Tilewa Adebajo. He is an investment banker and also an economic analyst. Good morning, gentlemen, and thank you so much for coming in.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Well, Mr. Adebajo, since it's your first time on our program, let me start with you. When you heard the pronouncement, let me not bring my opinion in here, but when you heard the announcement, what did you think? Were you surprised? Did you think that there should have been a shifting backwards and not shifting forwards?
Well, it depends on the objective. First of all, I think what impressed me was the fact that it was a bold step forward. And I think the events of the global economic headwinds has jolted the central bank into action. And very drastic action for that matter. While the steps were very bold on the areas of the issues of the foreign exchange, in terms of addressing the issues around the monetary supply, because of sort of excess liquidity that we needed in the system, I think rates need to be coming down in this economy rather than going up, because we want to be able to sustain the growth in this economy and to be able to create the levels of employment and reduce the levels of poverty that could actually lead to proper economic stability. So while I felt that the steps were in the right direction and it was a bold move, there's still a lot of issues we need to address concerning managing foreign exchange and the excessive amounts of liquidity that we have in the system and the cost of sterilizing this money, and of course the cost of managing the debts and what the government is actually spending on debt service.
Mr. Riwani, a lot of people actually thought that the CBN would step back instead of go forward, probably bring it down to maybe 11% or even 10%, but instead 13%.
Actually, to understand the context of the Monetary Policy Committee actions of yesterday, you have to understand something, that fiscal policy is about stimulus, monetary policy is about stability. And also monetary policy, the framework for monetary policy in Nigeria is called the Implied Inflation Targeting Framework. In other words, with this you have a nominal anchor, and at this meeting the decision was to have a dual anchor, using the exchange rate and the interest rate as an anchor. What you have is a combination of variables. You could have actually devalued the currency much more, and it would serve the purpose of mopping up and creating a equilibrium value for the currency. But if you did that, the impact on the client, that is Nigeria, would be so much that it would be difficult to absorb it without creating disruption. So what was done was a combination of some exchange rate devaluation and some administrative tools of tightening, so that you can come to equilibrium using the two. Is it sustainable? No. But what will happen is that eventually, once the exchange rate is stabilized and the process is viable, you will see that the interest rates begin to come down, and you will allow it to sustain itself without using the exchange rate as the nominal anchor. So what was done was both a strategic and a tactical move. Tactically, to stabilize the currency from the pressure which it's facing. Tactically, to keep the currency, to take away part of the currency, but strategically to create what they call the real equilibrium exchange rate path.
But at what cost? At what cost? Because we have the real economy that's already stifled. They want funds, they're not getting funds. Lending rates has always been as much as 22 to 25, in some cases 28%. Yes. And everybody was hoping that with this move, or the move that they were expecting the Monetary Policy Committee to make, would kind of release funds more to the real economy, which desperately needs it.
Well, you see, there's a fear factor which you have to address, and if you have to take a look at the pronouncement from the fiscal side of the budget, and if you combine what the finance minister has said with what the central bank has done, so you now have a proper perspective of the economy in terms of what the fiscal side is and the monetary side is. the challenge you have really is the fact that while our economy might be growing at 6% per annum, or they've revised that down to about 5.5, you find yourself in a situation where the real growth that we need that can sustain the economy needs to be in double digits. But we are not able to achieve that because employment and poverty levels are still very high. And by the time you have a situation where you have female suicide bombers, young girls being recruited into this, then there's a level of economic hopelessness that has ensured in the system, and that's what we need to address. The key problem we have now is the fiscal deficit. We have not been able to maintain the excess crude account at over 10 billion. About 2008, just before the economic collapse, the level of the excess crude account was 20 billion. That was what helped us through that financial crisis. It's dropped now down to 8 billion about 2 years ago, and currently by next month we're looking at about 2 billion, because 2 billion is going to be withdrawn, and now you're talking about withdrawing another 400 billion into the system. We have not been able to manage the excess supply of naira within the system. So in terms, interest rates obviously will now have to be used as a tool at a higher rate to be able to manage instead of growth. So we are reacting in terms of managing the fiscal deficit as opposed to growing the economy.
So we keep managing, and at the same time we keep having our unemployment rate growing. So it now begs to reason that these policies are not looking at protecting that aspect of the economy, which at this particular point in time most Nigerians feel is more important.
Well, let me tell you something. You see, what we're here to discuss this morning is the monetary policy and its impact on the economy. The difference between fiscal policy and monetary policy is that fiscal policy, one, takes long. The time between when you carry out the fiscal policy change and when you get the results could be years. But monetary policy is instantaneous. So what you must understand is that if you are driving down the road and you find somebody, an accident victim, right? You can very well say, oh, this guy needs surgery, or this guy needs whatever it is. But you've got to stabilize the patient before you can even go into surgery. Here we are facing a serious headwinds. Here we are facing a 35% drop in our revenues. So the first thing to do, the guys who have the ambulance, is a central bank which is giving oxygen and stabilize the situation. The guys who are going to carry out the surgery and give the guy physiotherapy and all of that later on is fiscal. That's going to come later. But first of all, stabilize the situation. Secondly, there's a big difference between monetary conditions and monetary policy. When the monetary conditions are loose, monetary policy goes counter-cyclical to tighten it up and create stability. When monetary conditions are tight, you use monetary policy in the counter session by expanding and becoming accommodative. The monetary policy stands today because of, one, the sharp drop in our revenues, and two, the fact that all the institutions have this liquidity to buy the dollars was to use both to actually bring some stability to the dollar position. After that, you can then begin to address the other issues. But right now it is about stabilizing the patient so that the patient is in a position to recover.
So now with the current ban for the naira to the dollar exchange,
Yes.
168, how is that going to affect Nigerians? Because a lot of people, that's basically what they want to do.
Let me tell you what. Nigeria imports so many things, but first of all, take the commodity side. Rice, sugar, wheat, palm oil in some cases, aluminum. There's been a general drop in commodity prices. The commodity prices that have dropped are an average about 11%. The currency devaluation you're talking about is anything between 7 and 8%. So from a commodity standpoint, imported commodity standpoint, this move is inflation neutral. But from the finished good standpoint, it is going to be inflationary. But really, let us take a look at it. All other countries that are oil producers, all other countries that are commodity dependent, having to make this adjustment. So this is not just a Naira specific or Nigeria specific issue. It is actually affecting all oil producers and commodity producers almost equally. And almost all those currencies have gone down. It's an adjustment process. But the question is, if the value of if our exports actually increase, are we going to revalue the currency? Yes. So what we are looking for is not a value of the currency, it's an exchange rate determining mechanism, which makes it possible for the fair value of the currency to be established. And what has happened basically was that the central bank has, and the Monetary Policy Committee for that matter, I think the MPC in particular, has established its independence and its autonomy, and in spite of the political pressures, has done what is economically realistic, but what is politically inexpedient. It just takes some courage.